Okay. I have now finished all of the exam reviews. I'd say about 75% of you, in both sections, not just property, but overall, about 75% of students actually came to review their midterms. I don't know why that number wasn't 100. I really don't. For a quarter review, it just means you either didn't know or didn't care enough to get what your midterm score was, which was just surprising. I don't know how seriously people are taking this class so they couldn't take 30 minutes to go over their midterm. I really don't. I don't mean that as a criticism, because in my mind, if you don't care, I don't care. Right? In other words, if you're not willing to put that minimum effort in over the course of a month, you couldn't find half an hour, then I don't know how I can help you. When it comes to final exams and you don't get the score you like, they'll basically say, you did this in the midterm, you did this in the final, here's your progression. I'll have no idea. So, it's fine. Really, it's no sort of my back. I was, I think at my last student yesterday around 6. So basically, for about 6 hours straight with very, very few breaks, I was meeting with students. And almost everyone I met with, I gave them the chance to retake it if they wanted to, and I'll regrade it. And I'd done that for a number of people. And I found that to be quite helpful. Invariably, people don't take midterm as seriously as they should. But then when they get their midterm score, they get this sort of like a wake-up call, a defibrillator. They kind of just go, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not what I wanted to do. And then they do better. So I'm always happy to help in that regard. But that's done now. If you didn't go over your midterm and you didn't even email me the excuse of why you didn't go over it, I can't help you. But again, that's your decision. We're all adults here. We make our own choices every day. A few other notes in general. I do enjoy meeting. It's a lot of work, and I don't want to minimize it, but just it's many, many hours on my part where I'm just sitting in front of Zoom all day. But I really, truly enjoy meeting. I think I had 14 or 15 students yesterday. It was a lot. Everyone kind of came in the last day, which is fine. But you just have so many different, life experiences. You come from different places. You have different homes, different schools, different careers. Just such a wide range of students. It always makes me gratified to see how fascinating you are. You all came to law school from different perspectives, and just you want to achieve different things. It's really enjoyable to listen to it. I've also, come to appreciate how COVID has affected so many students so many different ways. I mean that sincerely. Some of you have had it in this class. Some of you have had family members who've had it. Some of you have had friends who've had it. Some of you have had no one that's had it. And just you've approached the last, 9 months just very differently. Some of you, are in complete lockdown bubbles, and you haven't even gone to a grocery store, which is where I find myself in, because you've had family members who've been at risk. And some of you are living your lives, that's where we are. I don't quite know. It's my place to judge, and I won't. But I do want everyone to know there's a wide range of people complying with what's going on, and that's just that's the world we live in. That's why I stay in my bubble, because then I don't have to worry about what anyone else does. I don't have to say, well, are they taking precautions? It doesn't matter to me. If someone is on Zoom, it just makes no difference to me what they're doing. Another thing just to mention is people have different reactions to the Zoom University, and it really varies. For a lot of students who have long commutes, they're actually quite happy with this, which is just, I didn't quite expect that, but that's a consistent refrain. A lot of students who are currently 2Ls really want the hybrid class where you're in person for half the time. If you really, really want the hybrid classes, I encourage you to talk to the people who are 1Ls who have the hybrid classes. Again, there's a mix of experiences. Some people, by the way, hybrid, if you don't know what it means basically a certain number of students are in the classroom and a certain number of people are online. So I one of the sections, a student told me there's maybe 6 or 7 people in the classroom and maybe 12 or 15 people on Zoom. And the general refrain is those who are in the classroom are probably getting a better education, but those who are on the Zoom end of it, who are at home, are getting a far inferior education. That's not consistent. People have different perspectives, but I heard a number of people tell me that the Zoom component of hybrid is worse than the general online because the teacher is not really teaching towards the online people; they're teaching to those in front of them. So, it may be good for those who are in person, but it may not be as good for those who are online. But maybe the fact that you're even in person makes up for the fact that you're online the other point. And it's a hard balance. I've not taught hybrid. I think I'd have a lot of trouble doing it because there's, you don't realize, but I'm doing a lot of things. I'm looking at the camera. I'm sort of positioning myself. I'm doing a lot of things to make this look good. Of lighting, right? But if I'm in person, it's hard to do all those things and make it fly. It's a little bit more rushed and crude. So, be careful what you wish for. The hybrid is not a panacea. I think it will work well in a small section, like maybe 10 people. Like if you have like a seminar, an upper level seminar, I think it might be better for that. But for a 1L class, I'm really skeptical. I mean, if people might like to think, oh, we're in person, but actually learning more. I don't know that you learn more in a hybrid. That's my bottom line. It's not what you enjoy more. What do you find more enjoyable? It's what are you learning most from? And I'm not convinced you learn more from a hybrid. I think it feels better because it feels more normal, but I'm not sure that's actually more educational. That's my perspective. I don't know, but I'm skeptical. What else do I want to recap from all the meetings? For those of you who met with me and decided to retake your finals, I'm grateful for that. Midterms. It's very, very helpful for me to see that you're putting that effort in because it shows that you care enough. Our semester, my friends, is basically over. We're right on schedule. I honestly didn't think I could do it. I thought we'd fall far behind, but thankfully we are right on schedule. I'm looking at our syllabus now. Today's class number 25. This is our final unit on takings. We have 2 class periods left. We have class on Wednesday the 18th, and we have class on Monday the 23rd. Those are our 2 class periods left. What I want to do to wrap up the semester is to give you one last opportunity to take a final. So Wednesday morning, we're going to take a sample final. We're not using ExamSoft. I'm just not wasting my time with that stuff. Again, it's a waste of time. Here's what I want to do. Around 8:30 Wednesday morning, I will email you one of my old exams. I won't tell you which one. If you want to do them all, that's fine. I can't stop you. But I'll email you one of my old final questions. And I'll say, do this one, right? Take 90 minutes and do this one. So if you want to start at 8:45, so that way you finish in time for your next class, that's fine. If you don't want to do it Wednesday morning, if you want to do it Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening, I actually don't care. It doesn't matter to me, right? But I'll tell you Wednesday around 8:30 which exam I want you to take. You don't need to submit it to me. In fact, don't submit it to me. I don't want to see it. I don't need 100 and whatever attachments coming in. What I will do, though, is you already have it. You'll have access to the A+ answer and a memo. I'm actually maybe one or the other. I'm not sure which one you'll have. You'll either an A+ answer or a memo, or maybe both. I can't remember. I haven't decided yet. And you'll go over it. Then on Monday morning, we'll have what I call the review session. Monday at 9. The review session is where I go over the final exam in painstaking detail, and I'll take all of your questions. If you have questions about that that final, please come with it Monday morning. That's your chance to ask it. It'll be recorded. If you can't make it, that's fine, but that's your opportunity. All right? In general, I've given all of you the chance to take makeup finals, to redo it in your own. If I've asked you to do it, that's fine. Monday's going to be the deadline for that. If you want me to review an old final you took, I'm going to make that the deadline Monday. I don't want this spilling to the finals week because it gets too hectic. I spent probably, almost 40 hours doing midterm reviews this month, and it's a lot. So I'm going to make Monday the deadline to go over midterms or finals. It's your deadline. I hope you can do it. Your exam is, when is it? The first, right? So am I your first exam or close to it? I see people nodding. Okay. So look, your review is going to be the 23rd. Your exam's I guess it's Tuesday the 1st. You know, Thanksgiving is with Thursday. I would usually make the cutoff 40 hours before, but that's a Sunday. You know what? All right, I'll keep it to Sunday. I usually don't like. Okay, so that's fine. If you want to get me questions by Sunday, I'll review them. But that'll be the cutoff for questions. So just say Sunday by 5 p.m. I'll be happy to review questions by then. After that, let me explain the reason why I give a cutoff. I find that as the time to an exam shrinks, the quality of questions decreases significantly, and it's more people panicking. Dana, why is that a bad day? Tell me, what do you have on Sunday?
No. I wasn't going to say that. I was just going to ask if you were going to do a waiting room.
Yeah, I'll do something similar where I'll have maybe a queue on that Sunday, and if you email me, I'll just tell you what the specifics are. But I'll probably just have the same queue and just I'll let one in at a time. You know, I'll be honest. I thought that worked pretty well. Did it work for you all pretty well? I mean, it's not ideal, but I had 15 people on the queue yesterday. I'm telling you, people signed on at 12, at 1, at 2, at 3, at 4, at 5, and just I kept updating the queue. And then eventually the queue was 0. I was like, okay, I'm done for the day. I can go eat dinner, right? It was long. The last person I think finished right around 6. I can't remember if it was this or my Kamala. They were all mixed together. But yeah, I'll do something if you guys email me by Sunday, and I'll make some time. And by Sunday by 5, I think that's reasonable. That's about 48 hours for the exam. And that way I can answer your questions. All right. So again, if you want me to review an old exam or an old midterm that you've took, that's fine. By the 23rd, we'll do office hours. If I can't get you all done that day, I'll do it the next day, but I'll try and get as many as I can done. And I'll do the following Sunday. That way you have all Thanksgiving weekend to sort of get ready and prepare. And I think that'll take us till the end of the semester. I can't believe it. I've had you all for a full year. It feels like it never happened. It's sort of this dream where I know I had a semester, right? I know I have students. I just haven't seen any of you, right? Like I know you exist. You're on my little Zoom cube, but just you're sort of in this cloud, literally, right? Cloud of this figment of my semester imagination. It's just so bizarre. In 20 years we'll look back at this and laugh like, what the hell were we doing? But you'll tell your kids about this one day. Like they will not understand what COVID is. Like, Mommy, why were you washing plastic bags? Right? It's like like they will never understand what this was. Maybe you don't exist. I'm having an existential crisis where there's like this matrix I'm in, where this is not real, where you're all just AI simulations, a bunch of deep fake Zoom grids, where you're not real. Perhaps, I don't know, but my daughters are they can't. They're not going to remember any of this. I'll explain to them one day, like, this is why you couldn't pet the puppies because, everyone has COVID and you can't go near people. All right. I think I'm done. I hope you all exist. No, I know you exist. You were in my class last semester. My convalescents might be a bunch of deep fakes. That's what I'm convinced as. They're just fakes. All right. What else? Nothing? All right. Well, I appreciate that. Again, I appreciate your flexibility in the schedule. I'm trying to be as accommodating as I humanly can. I've put a lot of thought into this semester, and we actually finished on time. So I'm actually very, very happy with you all. Not all classes are on schedule, so I'm happy we are. All right. Let's do a question that's going to make you wince. This is going to be a hard one. You're not going to like it, but I think we're going to have to suffer through this. We want to wrap up our topics on takings today. Here's the class notes. Oh, here, let me turn on the closed caption. I forgot. I'm sorry. By the way, a lot of you really are happy with the otter. I'm thrilled to the moon for that. I wish I knew about this earlier. I'm sorry I didn't. I just learned about it a few weeks ago. I wish I had learned about it earlier, but I do the best we can. I don't think there's any enthusiasm for other professors to adopt it. That's just my initial take. I've tried to push it and no one's interested, so I think you're stuck with me. I think the only law professor in the country uses it, so you're very lucky, but just no one else wants to use it. That's their decision. All right. Let's do what I'll call question number 1. The chance won't matter. It won't matter, my friend. Oh, by the way, live you had some moot court competitions, ADR competitions. Congratulations. I know some of you actually won. Good job. We have a lot of winners in this class. Very good. No, there's no poll. All right, so let's take a look at question number 1. And then this is going to get us thinking about today's class. So the question is this. A owns Blackacre, a lakefront property. Yes, good job to Moises and Lexus. Great job. I know, and I think Chance was a runner-up or a winner of something else. Just I know you all did a good job.
Technically, Cam and Mir should have won, but they had some stuff going on. So Grace and I filled in. But actually, Lexi Laura would probably be the person of note. I'm surprised she didn't win. I think she'd rock.
Well, congratulations to Cam and everyone else. But I'm very proud of you all. I mean that. You guys do a really good job. I know it's not easy. Thanks, Chance, for that. Oh, that's right. Cam had to forfeit because he had another conflict of schedule. That's right. He told me. All right. Good job. So question number 1. A owns Blackacre, lakefront property. The government designates Blackacre a prickly wildlife habitat and prohibits construction on the land. All right. A sues the government for taking. Now the question is, which Supreme Court precedent provides the appropriate test to resolve this question? Because this is always the question I get. Professor Blackman, Josh, what do I do? What test do I apply for a takings question? I always get this question, and just you're not going to like the answer. You are not going to like the answer. And I think Chris has said you started D today. Is that right? Is that Allison or Catherine? Which D is up?
Allison.
All right, Allison. All right, I'll give another 10 seconds and I'll call on you, okay? Oops, sorry, give me this wrong spotlight. All right, Allison, help us out here. I'm going to stop the poll. All right, so let's go step by step, and this is going to take a few minutes. It might take like 15, actually. All right, before we get to the fact pattern here, I want to do each of these precedents separately, right? What was Loretto?
It was that there's a permanent physical occupation, then there's no balancing. It's just a taking and it requires compensation. But there could be a temporary invasion, and that requires balancing.
Okay, that's really good. Allison, just help us out here. What were the facts in Loretto? You want to just remind us, please?
The cable company was putting wires. They were actually drilling them in between on these rental properties. And it was like a 1-inch wire that Loretto was mad about and said it was a taking.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Allison. All right, so the first precedent that we studied in this topic was Loretto, okay? Now, we studied Loretto first, but this wasn't the court's first takings case, right? We sort of studied these things out of order. So what Loretto was based on is the idea that usually when you have a takings case, you do some sort of balancing, right? We'll get to the balancing a little bit later, but the usual presumption is you have this sort of balancing test where you look at, how much of an economic impact did this taking make, right? How much money did the person invest in this property? What is the character the government's taking, right? There are these 3 factors that we keep seeing, right? What's the economic impact? How much money was invested in the property? And, what is the character? What is the nature of the taking? And what Loretto said is that when the third factor, when the character of the taking is this permanent occupation, the other 2 factors don't really matter. It doesn't matter that, you lose $1, right? It doesn't matter if you didn't really invest anything in the property, right? It doesn't matter if the resale value stays exactly the same. when the third factor, this character of the governmental action, takes the form of a permanent occupation, then it's a bright line rule. It's called a per se, or automatic taking. It's automatic. You don't have any balancing. It doesn't matter. So, Allison, Catherine, you here?
Yes.
So, Catherine, when you have this when the character of the taking is this permanent occupation, does it matter that only $1 is lost?
No.
So you can have a taking where there's the damage, like a stupid little wire that no one even sees.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Catherine? That think of the case we have today, where these people in Wisconsin weren't able to sell their land they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? They lose, but the woman in New York, Loretto, she wins because she has a stupid little 1-inch wire. Does that sort of all or nothing test make sense?
No. I think that's when you would go to Penn Central. Right?
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Catherine. So, I think Catherine makes a fair point, right? If you fit in the category of Loretto, right? You fit into this permanent physical occupation. You're home. You're easy, right? You win. You may not win a lot. You may win $1, right? But you win. But if you don't fit within the Loretto test, then you have to consider the other tests. And let me tell you, my friends, the other tests are uphill battles. If you're in the other tests, you're probably going to lose. Not necessarily, but you're probably going to lose. All right, so the first thing I want you guys to get is you have these three factors, right? You can ask what's the economic impact, you ask how much money's been invested in the property, and you ask what's the character. If you think of the character of the taking as a permanent occupation, you're done, you're home. So you always need to consider those three factors, even if you have this permanent physical occupation, right? Right? You say, well, we start factor 3 and then we're done. But you at least have to be aware of those three factors. There's not like a single Loretto test. Loretto sort of fits into the broader framework. Does that make sense? Okay. Dan, you here?
I'm here.
You're here. I saw you earlier. I know you're here. Okay. Dan, help us out here. What is the Hadacheck case, please?
It's basically the government can regulate the use of property if they are using it to address a nuisance.
Okay. Now, when you say regulate, I want to just be precise here. What does that mean to regulate property?
To prohibit or narrow the uses of a specific land.
Okay. So in that case, Dan, just one more question. What exactly did the government do?
Let me go to my notes. Let's see. The clay, they said, okay, good. So they said it was a misdemeanor. The commercial uses they enacted, it's a misdemeanor.
What were the facts in Hadacheck? What was actually going on there?
So the Hadacheck had a land that included a very valuable bed of clay.
Good. And what did the state prohibit?
So he prohibited the uses in a commercial use, I think, because it would have been too much.
No.
But he could do it as a residential.
No, that's not right. No.
So he enacted an order prohibiting the operation of the brick-making facilities.
Okay, good. That's it. Good. Okay. Thank you, Dana. All right, so Hadacheck's an old case from the 1920s, right? And it doesn't fit in neatly with the modern cases, but it sort of does. And Justice Scalia tried his best to work in Hadacheck and Lucas. But Lucas stands for a general proposition. the government can deprive you of the value of your entire property if the government's regulating a nuisance, right? So think of like a factory that's polluting. The government can shut it down, right? The government can shut it down. Or think of a toxic waste dump, right? The government can shut it down to get rid of the nuisance. Or think of like the feedlot. Remember the Del Webb case you studied, Del Webb Industries. Did Del Webb say, wait a minute, this is a taking, you're shutting down our business, right? How can you do this? No, because there's a pretty long-standing understanding that the government can prohibit nuisances as part of its police power. And that case was unique because the developer had to pay for it, but that's sort of a quirky remedy. All right. But who's next? Chris, you here?
I am.
Okay, but Chris, when we say that a regulation for nuisance deprives the value of all of its property, is that actually right? All the value? Is that correct?
Well, it would depend on the property and what other alternative uses you would have for it, right? Like here, this wildlife habitat, maybe you can still run tours through it, even though you can't construct something on it. Maybe you've got some alligators or something. People want to come through and see alligators. But what if you can't do that? What if there's environmental laws that say you can't have people in where the animals are? Then you wouldn't. What else would you do with it? So it kind of depends on. I needed more facts from your question.
I know. That's fair. So, Chris, what I'm getting at is it usually going to be the case if all value is deprived?
Probably not. There's probably something that you can do with it.
Go camping, maybe?
Yeah, like they said, Lynn Lucas, that's what they said, is he bought $1 million camping site.
You're funny. I like that. Very good. Exactly right. I've never heard it like that. That's good. Yeah. But $1 million campsite. Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's very, very good. What we have here is this test, though, where we sort of ask, is the value of the property basically dropped to zero, right? Is there any value to the property? And this comes up in a lot of the cases. And we can look at this two ways, right? One, we could say, well, of course not. There's always value to property. You can sell it. You can keep people off of it. You can pitch a tent and put a sleeping bag down and go camping, right? You can walk around and observe the beauties of nature. I don't think there's any land which you can't walk on. You might not be able to use a vehicle or drive on it, but at least you could walk over it. Go hiking or something. Maybe there's like some sort of protected plant life they can't even walk on it. I suppose that's possible. Maybe you can just look at it from a distance. My point is sand dunes. Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Chance. There's always going to be some itty bitty use of property. Always something you can use it for, right? So the test the courts put forward of are you deprived of all the value of your property is somewhat, it's a stupid test, right? Because it's never actually going to be true. What I think the courts usually mean is, realistically speaking, right? Can you use it for your intended purpose, right? You bought $1 million property to build a beach house. You didn't buy $1 million campground, right? That's what Chris said a minute ago. But you have this debate between the majority saying, this is depriving of all of its value. And then it sounds like, no, you can go camping. Okay. Even in Hadacheck, the case we're talking about, the land could not be used for brick baking, but maybe it could be used for something else. Open up a popsicle stand. I don't know, right? Just do something there that's not baking brick. So always the government says, here, go use it for another purpose. And the property owner says, that's not what I want to use it for. At least in the context of nuisance, the property owner loses, right? With nuisances, you can deprive the land of all of its value. That's Hadacheck. Everyone with me? I'm going through these very deliberately because they don't neatly line up. Okay, that was Chris. I think Ashley. You hear Ashley? No, Ashley? Okay, she's out. Sarah, you here? Sarah? Maybe this is a figment of my imagination. All right. No, Sarah. Anthony, here?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, Anthony. Help us out here. Tell me, what was Penn Central about?
Penn Central was about the Grand Central Station.
Okay, good.
They wanted to build on top. The owners of Grand Central Station wanted to build on top, but because of the zoning laws, they couldn't. Or because of this new, I can't remember if it was a zoning ordinance or a new act they passed. I think it was a new act, so they could preserve the historical nature of the station itself. They challenged it, saying that it was a taking because they were going to make more money by building the extra storage space.
Good.
And the court disagreed with them.
Okay, good. Now, Anthony, just to help me out with one thing. With the Penn Central case, did the court consider the air rights as like a separate interest? It's sort of like this separate entity that they were focusing on.
No, they said it was all together. That should have been considered all together.
All right, so just let me try this a different way. What percentage of the air rights was the government regulating?
All of it?
100. Keep it 100. Yeah, 100%, right? Now, Anthony, if the court had focused just on the air rights, would there have been a complete diminution of value, 100% diminution of value?
Yes.
I think so. I'm sure they would say no, because look, you can just sit there and you can marvel at the beautiful fresh air. You can look at the sky, right? This sort of, don't PM me, tell me it's raining, right? Right. It's one of these things. But yeah, sure, you can look at the sky. It's gorgeous out. But I think Anthony's right. Here in this case, there was a 100% chance, 100% diminution of value of the air rights. Usually when you have a 100% diminution of value, you're going to have a taking, right? The courts acknowledge that. So let's walk through one at a time, right? Was there a nuisance? No. Building the tower would not have been a nuisance. Was the government permanently occupying that space? Not really. They weren't installing anything. They're saying you can't build. So then we say, okay, what is the relevant basis? If we focus only on the air rights, then there is a full, complete 100% diminution of value. But the important move that the court does in Penn Central is to say we don't limit this to just the piece that's being taken. We look at all the property that's being owned. And this is what's called the denominator, right? The denominator problem. Do you remember from, I know you hate me, fractions from middle school math, right? Right? If you have the number 1 over 2, 1/2, right? Number 1 is the numerator and number 2 is the denominator. The number 2 is what you're dividing by, right? So let's just say, I'll make it easy, right? The value of the air rights is $1 million. And they're taking all the air rights. So you're losing $1 million. If you divide $1 million by $1 million, you get 100%, right? If you focus only on the air rights, there's 100% taking. Okay, now try it differently, right? I will not use the whiteboard. I know you guys hate that. That's consistently, people say don't use the whiteboard. I will not use it, I promise, right? Now let's say you have $1 million air rights, but you look at the entire train station. Let's say the train station has a $10 million value. So you have $1 million for the air rights over $10 million. You have a 10% diminution in value, right? Depending what you make as the denominator, the case looks very different. The key move in Penn Central was they say we look at the parcel as a whole. The parcel as a whole. We look at the value of the entire property that's being regulated. Not just the little component that's being regulated, but the entire property. And because Penn Central, the train station, can receive a benefit, a return on their investment from the train station itself, they can't complain. They don't win, right? They look at the entirety of the parcel as a whole. That phrase should sound familiar. The parcel as a whole concept comes from the dissent in Penn Coal, Justice Brandeis's dissent. So even though Justice Brandeis was in dissent in Penn Coal back in the 1920s, Penn Central basically makes Brandeis the majority opinion. It doesn't say so, explicitly. This is Brennan. Brennan was never very careful or candid about what he was doing. He was always very get 5 votes and run, right? But Brennan more or less made the Brandeis opinion a majority opinion. Okay, you look at the parcel as a whole, right? You can't just look at the air rights in the abstract. You have to look at everything together. Everyone with me? All right. Then Penn Central introduces this test, which, depending who you ask, has 2 factors, has 3 factors, has 4 factors. I'm going to say 3, but I know why people say otherwise. But I'll just give you the 3 factors I see, because Brennan doesn't actually number factors. They are just jumbled together, and it doesn't really matter. So I'll figure it out later. And eventually they figured it out. There are these 3 factors that are sort of considered, none of which are actually very important. 1 and 2 are very similar. The first factor asks, what is the economic impact of the taking? Right? What is the economic impact of the taking? Now, that factor depends on what your parcel is, right? If you're focusing only on the air rights, then it's a huge economic impact you're losing. But if you focus on the parcel as the whole, that's not as bad. So really, the first factor is almost irrelevant. It's basically asking, are they regulating just part of it or the entire of it? And even if they're regulating all of it, you're still going to lose, right? I'm trying to make this point as carefully as I can. You don't win the Penn Central test, right? It's Hotel California. You check in, you don't check out, right? Once you're in Penn Central land, you're going to lose. It's very, very rare that a Penn Central claim wins. You're going to lose. It's just like, it's like going into a casino where they rig the deck of cards, and no matter what card you draw, you're going to bust, right? You go over 21. That's Penn Central. No matter what test you draw, you're going to lose. So it doesn't really matter. But I'll tell you the test anyway. So the Penn Central test, the first factor is what's the economic impact. And then it doesn't really matter because even if it's huge, it's like, all right, whatever, you'll deal with it. The second factor is one that always gives students difficulties. I'll give you the acronym first, and then I'll tell you what it means. DIBE, D-I-B-E. D-I-B-E. It stands for Distinct Investment-Backed Expectations. Distinct investment-backed expectations. Josh, what the hell does that mean? No one really knows. Brennan got that from a law review article. He sort of just changed words around. What it's getting at is, did the person invest money into this new construction, and did they expect to get a return on that investment, right? Did they expect to get a return on their investment? In other words, did you just draw blueprints, or did you actually, pour concrete and invest money and get some reasonable expect to return for your investment? Okay, now why is this a rigged deck? Why is this a trap? Because in New York, you can't start building until you have a permit. Right, obvious, right? You can't build something unless you have the correct licensing. How are you supposed to invest money in a project that you can't build? In other words, what bank will give you a loan to build a skyscraper if you don't have the appropriate permitting yet? So it's basically a scam, right? You're not going to have these distinct investment-backed expectations unless you have the permit. And the reason why you're going to court is you don't have the permit. So it's a scam, right? It's not real. I don't like being a cynic in this class. You should have in con law. But it's basically, it's a trap, right? Unless you built something in the past and the government's trying to regulate something you built in the past, the second factor is almost never going to be met. So really the first factor is never going to be met. The second factor is almost never going to be met. The only factor that actually matters is the third factor. And the third factor is Loretto, right? Loretto came later, but Loretto helped explain what the third factor means. The character of the action, right? Brennan, can you explain what that meant, right? The character of the action apparently means, is it permanent or temporary? Right? If it's a permanent occupation, okay, then you win. You don't consider the first two factors. Now you get what makes such a big deal, the first two factors, right? The first two factors don't matter a lick. They don't matter at all. All that matters is the third factor. So there's no balancing, because once you start balancing, you lose. Okay? I often wonder whether I should do Penn Central first and Loretto second. And I end up not doing, because Loretto is so much easier. I usually like to do it first, but I think you can flip it. It might make more sense. Maybe I'll do it next year. I'll try it. I always go back and forth on that one. But Loretto gives meaning to the third factor of Penn Central, right? Loretto explains what the third factor of Penn Central means. That character is asking if it's permanent. Meanwhile, Brennan dissented in Loretto. He's like, no, it still doesn't matter, right? So basically, the upshot of Penn Central is it makes it very hard to win a takings case unless you have these permanent physical occupations. And then Loretto gives you a path to compensation. And even with the compensation, you're going to get like $1. It's not going to matter. All right. I'll do Lucas in a minute. Chance, go ahead, please.
If we had an essay question like this.
You read my mind. All the above, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah, let me answer Chance's question a little bit now. I'll get to more later. When you're doing questions, you have to walk through each of these steps. It sucks, I know. You have to ask yourselves, is there a permanent physical occupation like in Loretto? In that case, the other two Penn Central factors don't matter. You ask yourself, is there a nuisance being taken, right? In which case, there's not going to be taking, right? If there's not a physical occupation and there's not a nuisance, then you go to Penn Central, right? In which case, you're probably going to lose. Unless you get to the fourth case, we'll do in a minute, which is Lucas. I'll summarize this later at the end of class. It sucks. This is my least favorite topic to teach in law property. I hate it because it makes no sense, right? So it's like, what's the test? There's like 5 tests and they all overlap. They don't make sense, right? This is an area of the law that even those who disagree on the outcome agree that the jurisprudence sucks. The court has just done a really bad job here. They've made a hash of it. It's incoherent. I mean, it's coherent, but the way it's been dragged together, it's not easy to teach. I'll leave it like that. Okay. Any questions on Penn Central? I mean, I can teach an entire semester on Penn Central. It's a hard case, and there are so many wrinkles and so many nuances that I can't even do justice to it in a class period. All right. Who's next? Caitlin, you here? Caitlin? Mm-hmm. Farron, you here? What's going on? Alan? Oh boy. Uh-oh. Brianna, you here? Come on. I don't mark all of you guys absent. All right. Thomas.
Yeah, I'm here.
What the hell is this, 4 in a row? I thought I gave a warning last week. All right. Thomas, you want to give me the facts on Lucas, please?
Yeah, so Lucas bought 2 lots on the coast for about $1 million, and he wanted to build single-family houses on the lots. But 2 years later, South Carolina passed a law which prevented him from building any houses, and he claimed it was a taking, but the trial court found that, the act made his property valueless, so they thought it was a taking.
Okay.
But then the state Supreme Court reversed and said it was a proper use of police power.
Okay, very good, Thomas. I appreciate that. Thomas, help me out with one thing, though, right? We've now done a couple tests. We've done Loretto, we've done Hadacheck, we've done Penn Central. Where does this case fit in within those tests? Like, what test is being applied here to get to the right answer?
So I thought about it as Scalia creating an exception to Penn Central.
Creating an exception to Penn Central. How's that work?
So, well, first he said it's not it's not like Loretto, and then he kind of altered Hadacheck to get around the nuisance.
Whoa, hold on. Let's stop there. What do you mean altered Hadacheck? Just I think you're right, but I want to understand what you mean there.
He distinguished it as saying that the government could regulate a common law nuisance, but not a statutory nuisance.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then what's the third thing Scalia did? I think you're almost done.
Then he said, you apply Penn Central, but if all economic uses are taken away, then it stops there and it's no balancing is required. So
which factor of Penn Central? Is that the first factor, the second factor, third factor? Where's that fit in?
I guess it's mainly economic impact.
Probably, yeah. Okay, Thomas, that was excellent. Very good. I think you did a good job with that. Thank you, sir. This is Justice Scalia, who I'm sure you all know was quite conservative. He was not a fan of Justice Brennan's opinions. Brennan and Scalia were foes. They disagreed on everything. And Scalia came onto the court in the late 80s, mid 80s, and then early 90s. The court became more conservative. And Scalia was like, okay, enough of this crap, right? This Penn Central test is not going to work for us. It's just sort of this wishy-washy test that doesn't mean anything. So Scalia could have just overruled Penn Central, right? That would make things a lot neater. But he did not have the votes, right? You always think of a Supreme Court opinion. Why don't they just adopt the best reasoning? Well, because you need the votes. And he couldn't get Justice Kennedy to go along with that. I think O'Connor was in the majority, so he probably can get O'Connor to go along with it, right? He had to sort of figure out a way to... would you say Thomas revise? Is that the word he used? Revise, I think he used. Revise, right? He had to find a way to revise the precedent without overruling it, which is always very tricky. So Scalia, who was very, very smart, came up with this sort of halfway solution, which, to be frank, didn't really make much of an impact. I'll explain why a little bit later. But he came up with this halfway solution. He said, look, we can keep the structure of Penn Central, right, with its three factors, right? The factor number one is economic impact. The factor number two is these distinct investment-backed expectations. And the factor number three is the character of the taking. Right, so let's start with factor three. Was there a permanent physical occupation here like in Loretto? No, the state wasn't requiring Lucas to install anything on his beachfront property. They just said you can't build. Did he have a distinct investment-backed expectation? Well, he didn't invest in building yet, but also he paid about $1 million for these lots. I think Chrissa said earlier, you don't spend $1 million to buy a campsite, right? I think she put it quite well. But even under Penn Central, it's not clear that he had invested enough money to make the investment-backed expectations distinct, whatever that means. But the first factor, Scalia says, is significant, right? What's the economic impact, right? What's the impact of the taking? And here the trial court found that the land was deprived of all value. And Scalia's like, aha, okay, I got this, right? a regulation deprives a property of all value, then it's a taking. And then the other two factors don't work. So in other words, with Loretto, you focus only on factor 3, right? And with Lucas, you focus only on factor 1, economic impact. So it's this weird thing. We have this balancing test that doesn't actually balance. You have this balancing test where either the first factor matters or the third factor matters, but it doesn't really matter. It's just not real. It's not a real test, which is why students hate it so much. I can't give it to you like, it's not like negligence or something. It's just it's so weird. Yeah, Mackenzie, go ahead, please.
So under this test, Hadacheck would have been a taking.
I'll get to Hadacheck in a minute. We're not done with Hadacheck. I'll get to check soon. I promise. I'm not done. I promise. I'll get there. Okay. So Scalia is first working through, Penn Central, right? And he comes up with this thing and says, well, the trial court found that there's a complete diminution of value. That goes too far. Remember the language from Justice Holmes in Penn Cole? If it goes too far. All right. So this one goes too far. All right. So that makes sense, right? I suppose, if it decreases all the value. But then we've had a check. Thank you, Mackenzie. You're like 30 seconds too early, right? But then we've had a check. And this is a case from the 20s where the court says, well, if there is a nuisance, you can deprive it of all the value. So how does Scalia square that? He's like, well, not all nuisances are covered. Only common law nuisances are covered under the Hadacheck rule. Why? And he gives a reason that I think actually makes some sense. He says, when you buy a piece of property, you have certain expectations, right? You can look at the law that exists and say, under the law that exists today, I will be able to build on the beach. But what if the government changes the law? That alters your expectations. So what Scalia says is only common law nuisances are covered. If this is a statutory nuisance created by statute, it can still be a taking. Now keep in mind, South Carolina enacted its coastal management law in 1977, and then Lucas bought it a decade later. Right? Lucas bought his land after the law was enacted. But then the law was expanded to bar Lucas from building. So when Lucas purchased his land, this law existed, like he was aware of it, or at least maybe he could have been aware of it, I suppose. But he didn't need a permit. But after Lucas purchased his property, the law was modified. And they prevent him from building. So Scalia says, look, when he bought this, his expectations were he could build. Maybe that's a second factor of Penn Central. It's not very clear on that, right? But the bottom line is, this is not a common law nuisance that was part of his expectations that formed the background of why he bought it. So let me try to summarize this again. It's very messy, right? We look at the first factor, and we say there's a complete diminution of value. The other two factors probably are not satisfied. So Penn Central suggests that there's a taking. We look at Hadacheck. This is not a common law nuisance, so they can't rely on the police power. So this is the rare case, Lucas, where compensation must be provided. Right? Because it deprives him of all the value of his property, or at least that's what the majority says. Krista, go ahead.
So are you saying, so they did reference in that case that if the prescribed use was in the title to begin with and then the state took it away later, that makes it not a state's nuisance, or then they had to go back and look at it under the common law. But does it make a difference if the prescribed use was in the title or not when they bought it?
It does. It does. Because it affects the economic impact, right? So let's say I own a piece of land that's regulated as you can't build on it, right? I'm not selling it for $1 million, right? No one's going to buy my beachfront property for $1 million if you can't build on it. Lucas paid $1 million for this land because it was not regulated. So I think the short answer is, once land is regulated, let's say it's not grandfathered in, subsequent purchasers will know that and adjust their investment properly. What was key here is that Lucas paid here $1 million for the land, and a couple years later they put the restrictions on it. Right.
So, and to go back to zoning, it's the buyer's responsibility to understand what the zoning is of the land and what the restrictions are before they buy it. And if the seller doesn't tell them, there's no liability for the seller. And if they had the wrong assumption, buyer's still going to be at fault.
And look, think of Euclid, right, where they retroactively zoned his property and dropped it by 70% value. So I'm telling you, it's just a shell game, right? You're going to lose unless you got a good majority opinion, right? Unless Scalia got Kennedy to come along, you're going to lose, which is the short answer. In our next case, Scalia was dead and Kennedy wrote the majority, which means you lose, right? So you're sensing a pattern. This is property law at its worst, right? It's very much based on the beliefs of the Supreme Court justices, right? In Lucas, Scalia got Kennedy's vote, right? And he wrote it by this very wishy-washy, mealy-mouthed opinion. It doesn't really make much sense. But in our next case, the Wisconsin case, Scalia could not get Kennedy. So he was dead. Right? It's just, from the great beyond, for Scalia was stomping on his tombstone at this point. Damn it. The next case really sucks. I hate teaching it, but I will. But this case, at least, I can give you some test. But if my memory serves correctly, you can just check this. I don't think Scalia mentions the distinct investment-backed expectations test. I don't think he mentions it. I know Kennedy does. Hold on, does he? I think he mentioned it in a footnote, which might not be in your book. I'm just Googling it. I think he barely mentions it. So Scalia was basically saying, we're not going to talk about Penn Central. We're going to kind of just allude to it. But it's a weird opinion. All right, so let me try to summarize this again, because I know you're not happy with my explanation. No one ever is, right? Here, let me try this, right? I'm going to paste this to the class notes. It's not perfect, but if you just look at the class notes, and I'll share the screen just for a minute, you can all see what I'm looking at. We've done a few tests so far, right? If you were to get something like this on the test, on the exam, you should at least start your analysis by thinking about Loretto, right? And you say to yourself, is there some sort of permanent physical occupation? Okay? Is there some sort of permanent physical occupation? Loretto. And this is basically the third factor of the Penn Central test. If there is, you have a categorical or per se regulatory taking, and no compensation is required. And compensation is required. There's no balancing. But there's compensation. Okay, then you ask yourself, okay, if there's not a physical permanent occupation, what do we got? If there's a nuisance regulation, under Hadacheck, there's no compensation, even if you have a complete diminution in value. If there's no nuisance, you're in Penn Central land, right? Where we ask about the economic impact, the distinct investment-backed expectations, and the character of the taking. But also keep in mind the Lucas test, which focuses on the first factor. If you have a complete diminution in value, 100%, you have to play compensation. But that's the rare exception. Usually with Penn Central, you lose. It's very rare. This is not perfect. And in fact, there's a lot of problems with it, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later. But this will give you like a skeleton of an outline to go on. But you have to sort of suffer through the question. That's the only way to do it. Right? If Scalia had just applied the Penn Central test, this would be easier. Well, the first factor is so important that we just applied. But he didn't really talk about Penn Central. It wasn't important. He was trying to get rid of it. It's crazy. You will not have had any Scalia opinions during your career that were new. It's so hard to believe. Just, for such a long time, Scalia and Kennedy were in this sort of this fight, this jurisprudential battle, which Kennedy always won because he had more votes. And just it's over. They're both off the court. Just it's a new court. I actually yelled at our case book editors. They took out a Scalia opinion, which I really liked, and they removed it from this edition. Like, how can you do that? And times come, times go. Scalia opinions come, they go. All right. The dissent in Lucas is basically pissed. Justice Blackmun, again, no relation, was livid. He wrote the Loretto dissent as well. Justice Blackmun was like, this is so stupid, right? Of course there's value. You can go camping on the land, right? It's not what you expected, but too bad, right? We all benefit from clean water. We all benefit from healthy beaches. This is a benefit that we all share. We're just adjusting the burdens and benefits of society. Too damn bad, Mr. Lucas. Go home, right? You paid land for this, paid money for this property. Too bad. He's probably right that there's still some value to the land, right? It's not what Lucas expected, but there's still some value. I think the response Scalia would give is, well, that we have a stupid test. The test should not be all or nothing, right? It should be 100%. There should be compensation for less than 100%. But that's Penn Central. You couldn't get over Penn Central. Justice Stevens also dissented, and he suggested this was sort of disingenuous. This was not a real application of Penn Central. The reason why I mentioned the Stevens dissent is a couple years later, in a case, Lucas would be significantly limited. I didn't assign this case, but I'm going to mention it briefly. It's called Tahoe-Sierra. Tahoe-Sierra. It's from Nevada. The facts are pretty simple. The government said if you had this lakefront property near Lake Tahoe, you couldn't build for 3 years. There was a 3-year moratorium in building. You couldn't build anything. And guess what? After that 3 years, there was another 3-year moratorium. And guess what? After that 3 year ran up, there was another 3 years. So basically, it was a never-ending series of 3-year moratoriums that you couldn't build. Moratorium means a block. Okay? So in other words, you could never build. So this they learned from South Carolina. South Carolina said you can never build ever. In Tahoe, they said, well, you just can't build for 3 years. And we'll keep renewing the 3 years every 3 years. So you would think that Tahoe-Sierra comes out the same way. But no. Justice Stevens wrote the majority, and he got Kennedy. And the court said, well, it's not really a permanent taking with all value, because maybe in 3 years you'll get your value back. You still have fee simple. Maybe in 3 years they'll finally let you build something. So you still have some value, and there's not a taking. So whatever gains Scalia made in the Lucas case were more or less wiped out, washed out by Tahoe-Sierra, right? Now the government says we will not ban indefinitely. We'll just ban for 3 years at a time and keep renewing it for 3 years, right? Because maybe in 3 years you'll get lucky. Maybe we'll finally come around and say, you know what? You can build your mansion now. Not. All right, sorry, I just watched a Borat movie. Not. Right? It's not going to happen. Anyway, so that's the Tahoe-Sierra case. So Scalia tried hard, and in the end he lost Kennedy. And that's it. That's all it took. One person has so much power, so much air of the law is just scary. Okay. Questions so far? I want to do the last case. It was also a hard one to teach. Here. Allison, you here?
Okay.
Can you try, Allison, give us the facts in the Murr case? It's not an easy.
Oh, sorry. Not sure. So the facts are that the family inherited some land from their parents, and there was 2 pieces of property, and the first one was in the company itself, and the second one was actually in the parents' name. And they were both narrow along the river, and the second property didn't really have much value without the first property, and there were just questions about what you could build. The issue was whether when the children inherited the property, which I think actually happened at two different times, was that considered one piece of property altogether or two? So it's kind of looking at the denominator factor that we were talking about.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Allison. Okay, very good. This is a tricky case. You have two pieces of property, Lot E and Lot F, and they're right next to each other. Okay? And members of the family had owned these two lots for some time. Now, state law defined these as separate lots. There's lots E and there's lots F. All right. There was a law in effect that said you need to have a certain amount of space to build, right? If you have a lot that's very rocky, a lot of, it's bad terrain, you may not be able to build enough on it. So the law says if you want to sell one of these lots, it's illegal. The only way to sell one lot is to pair it with the other lot. Why does that make sense, Josh? Because you can't sell someone a piece of land they can't develop on, right? It doesn't make sense. Why would anyone buy one of these lots by itself if they can't build upon it? If they wanted, they can keep the land in their family, and that's just fine. They were grandfathered in. But in order to sell one lot, they had to sell both. But they didn't want to. They wanted to keep one lot and sell the other one. All right, so the value, if the lots were together, was about $700,000. If they could sell each lot separate, it was almost $800,000. If they could sell just lot F by itself, it's $370,000, and the undeveloped lot is not much. Basically, you can just go hiking on it for $40,000. Okay? So this case turned on what the relevant denominator is. Okay? The majority in the dissent agreed there was no taking, which is a rare case, right? They actually didn't disagree. They simply disagreed on what the relevant test was. Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote actually a very clean opinion here, he doesn't usually do that, but he wrote a very clean opinion here. When he's in dissent, he's very good. But when Roberts is in dissent, he doesn't have all this BS to think about. He's excellent. I love Roberts' dissent like anything else. But the chief said, to define the denominator, we look to state law. State law says that these two lots must be considered together, and therefore we consider them together. And the diminution value is not that much, from $700,000 to about $800,000, right? That's not a huge drop in value. Too bad, Murrs, you got to Murr, I suppose, right? You lose, right? The diminution value is not great. That would be a wonderful test to apply, but unfortunately we have Justice Kennedy. And Justice Kennedy puts together this very complex factor, right? These multi-factors where no single factor matters. We look to state law. How does state law define the denominator, right? But also we look to the physical characteristics of the land, how the land's treated under the state law, the prospective value of the land, and reasonable expectations. And you can look at the factors. I don't need to list them. They're meaningless, right? I don't know what any of this stuff means. All right, it's a very weird case because it doesn't come up very often. But it basically says when you define the denominator, there's no bright line rule, right? If you're ever buying property and you're worrying about what your denominator will be, you have no idea in advance. You can't rely on state law by itself. So it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. I hate this case. I hate teaching it. I hate it, but it's very messy to teach, right? So the grand scheme of all these cases is incoherence. All you can do, all I can ask you to do, is to walk through each test one at a time. Talk to me about Loretto, right? Talk to me about Hadacheck. Talk to me about Lucas. Talk to me about Murr. Talk about Penn Central, right? Talk about each case as best you can as if it's relevant. And that I think will get you as close as possible to the right answer. It's not going to be clean, right? The ultimate question is, does the government have to pay compensation, or is this a police powered regulation? And if you're ever not sure, right, you have no idea, just guess police power. You're probably right. It's very rarely going to be the case that you have to pay compensation. Outside of eminent domain, you always pay compensation. But the regulatory taking, it's usually going to be the case you pay no compensation. Questions? None? Yes, go ahead, Krista.
All right, so just because I kind of been thinking about takings and eminent domain together, but now I'm thinking that's not right based on your last statement. So eminent domain is if you have a condemnation and they're taking the whole of it.
Correct.
And a taking, you've got to figure out, like, if they're taking the whole of it, it's never going to be taking the whole piece under a taking. It's some, even with Loretto, it's some amalgamation of part of it or the use of it, whereas eminent domain is just all of it.
Well, right. So let me try to summarize it. With eminent domain, there's no dispute the government's taking your property. The government goes to court and says, we want to take Suzakilo's home. And then the only dispute is there just compensation? And is it for public use, right? With eminent domain, the government's on offense. It says, we are taking your property. You always know when there's eminent domain because the government's filing a petition in court, right? There's not any dispute. In case we have today, Loretto and Penn Central and Hadacheck, the government does not file for a condemnation proceeding. They're not filing for a taking. It's the opposite. The government does nothing. Say, here, we're just regulating. And then the property owner goes to court and says, you're taking my property. It's a defensive case, right? The government's on defense. I'll give you a phrase. I wasn't going to do it, but you made me, so I'll do it now. With eminent domain, it's called condemnation, right? The government files a condemnation proceeding. With a regulatory taking, it's the opposite. It's called inverse condemnation. Inverse condemnation. You'll see that phrase in your practice, I'm sure. Inverse condemnation is where the government says, "Oh, we're just regulating," right? And the property owner says, "No, you're condemning my land. Give me money." Right? Loretto said, "You're condemning my land. Give me money." Lucas said, "No, you're condemning my beachfront property. Give me money." Right? Penn Central said, "You guys are regulating my air rights. Give me money." Right? With inverse condemnation, you're seeking compensation. You're saying the government's taking my property. They just won't admit it. So in all the cases involving eminent domain, you have straight up condemnation. There's no doubt about it. But with a regulatory taking, it's the property owner who goes on the offensive and seeks inverse condemnation. That make sense, Carissa?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Other questions? All right. So the answer to the poll question is all the above. I think it's E. I realize 90 minutes later, I'll probably answer the damn question, but I think the best answer is E. You have to do all of them. You have to walk through all the tests, and that's the reason why I frame it like that. I'll start the minute poll now. Please put your answers in. Again, Wednesday morning around 8:30, I'll send you which question you have to do. Don't send it to me, please. I can't do another 100 attachments. Just do it in Word. Type it on your own. Please time yourself. That's why I'm giving you the class period. To give yourself 90 minutes of quiet. Please use that to your advantage. Take 90 minutes. Talk about Lucas. Or, talk about all the cases. But yeah, it's going to be a hard question. I don't know if actually the question maybe I'll put a take this question out there. I usually do. But go through all the tests. All right. Anything else? All right. I'll be back around 12:30 for office hours after common law. Both of our common law, that is. and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Professor Blackman?
Yes.
I just have a quick question. The final this semester is 2 parts, right?
Yep. Same as always.
Okay, that's what
Same as always.
well, because I think last semester.
Yeah, you guys were the outlier. That was the outlier.
Yeah.
I was too nice.
I was just making sure we're back on that.
Back to normal.
And then I guess I have one other question. Doesn't Lucas change our analysis now on a nuisance?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I just make sure.
All right. I'll see you guys later.